We are now webcasting.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee meeting, Wednesday, January 12th. This meeting is not a formal meeting of the Transport for the North Scrutiny Committee, but is being held as a consultation call by the Chief Executive under the delegated powers of the Chief Executive to take action in consultation with the members of the Scrutiny Committee. Following the consultation call, the Chief Executive would be delegated actions having regard to the consultation. The agenda and reports for the consultation call are being made available to the public, and the call is being live streamed on Transport for the North website to ensure openness and transparency. Members of the committee will attend the call virtually. This consultation call replaces the Scrutiny Committee meeting scheduled for January 12th, which has been cancelled due to the current public health issues. Thank you. So welcome everybody. I would like to wish everybody a happy new year. And first of all, I'd like to start with apologies, please, Gary.
Hi, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Jones, Councillor Davison, Councillor Lamb, Councillor Southern and Ian Craven as well.
Thank you. Moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? I'll take that as a no. Minutes of the previous meeting. I would like the committee to note the previous meeting, and if there are any issues, are those meetings an accurate record, first and foremost, of the previous meeting? Could I have someone who would propose and second? Thank you, Councillor Fenton.
I second, Councillor. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Melia. Okay. So the first item on the agenda was the monthly operating report. Unfortunately, Ian Craven is not with us today. So I would ask that, as this is a retrospective report and we have quite a few things on the agenda today, that unless there are any burning issues, I would request that members of the committee actually write to Gary if they have any questions, and he will forward the any questions to the relevant officer, and you will get answers. In fact, the answers will be circulated to the whole of the committee. The other reason for moving this item on is really that we were hoping that we might understand what our settlement policy or settlement is for the future year, and that as yet has not come to light. So we are not able to be any wiser over that particular issue. So I would like to move to the integrated rail plan, if that's agreeable by the committee.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. So I believe it will be Tim that will be taking us, Tim Foster, that will be taking us through the integrated rail plan. If you could do that just before you get started, I'd just like to mention to the committee that I've asked that items 5, 6 and 7, which are all related, and there are some of the answers to questions they raised in the previous item in the subsequent item, if you know what I mean. So therefore, I've asked that all three are presented first and foremost, so that perhaps some of your questions are already answered. At the end of the third item, we will then obviously discuss any issues arising, starting with any technical matters, if there's any technical challenges with that. So back over to you, Tim, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee. I am actually intending to keep my opening remarks on the integrated rail plan relatively brief, and that's both in the interest of time, but also because I think hopefully members will have had the chance to look at the paper we provided to you, and that largely sets out both the initial assessment that officers made of the implications of the integrated rail plan, the advice that we gave to the Transport for the North Board in late November, and you've also received a copy of the statutory advice that was agreed by the whole of the board and submitted to government following the board meeting in Leeds in November. I'm hopeful that between those two papers that you've got the overview of our emerging assessment and the integrated rail plan. It goes without saying that clearly the IRP falls some way short of the expectations that both were set in terms of the delivery of Northern Powers Rail, the completion of the HS2 network to both Leeds and Manchester, and TfN has had for a very long time a position that both MPR and HS2 need to be completed in full, of which this committee is well aware. So I wasn't intending to rehearse the arguments about why the IRP does not meet the expectations of the North. I thought I may just say some things briefly about next steps and activities. If I am missing anything, please do pick it up in the questions, because there's quite a bit in the IRP to cover. So I think first, in terms of that economic and environmental assessment, we were directed by the board to undertake one. Our ability to assess the IRP is limited because the evidence base behind the IRP hasn't been published, and despite both the interim chair of the board as well as the chief executive sort of making representations to the department, we still haven't seen the evidence base behind the IRP. What we can do is make an assessment based on the information that we have got, and therefore that will be limited in part, but we are able to assess, for example, the impact on local growth plans and strategies, where places like Leeds, indeed Bradford, Hull, have been planning for and preparing for the arrival of HS2 and MPR for some time, and therefore the absence of those interventions will inevitably mean that those local plans are put at risk. We've started to do some of the work around environmental impacts and the links through to the TfN decarbonisation strategy, and we've also started to look at some of the freight implications as well, from what is inevitably a much more limited picture in investment. The things that are harder to get at are some of the longer term intentions of government. So the integrated rail plan talks about the investment that is committed in the integrated rail plan being the starting point, or not being the end of the story rather, but with no detail for what that government vision of the end state looks like, nor the mechanisms through which further investment and further development may come along. And therefore we are left in part trying to assess a network where we have some answers from government on some of the corridors, and particularly on some of the key MPR corridors, and in other places where the end solution is left entirely open with actually no commitment to investment. And some corridors, particularly the routes out to Hull, particularly the corridor serving Bradford and connecting Bradford to Manchester, for which there is no solution and no apparent mechanism for getting to a solution. So there are lots of unanswered questions that then hinder officers' ability to look at the IRP in great detail. But we are going to do that assessment. We're continuing to look at it. Clearly, the more underpinning evidence that we can glean from the department, the better. But we will continue to understand that, because it's, if nothing else, it is essential for the completion of the TfN strategic transport plan, which we'll be talking about a bit later in the session, that we understand now the gaps in connectivity that come as a consequence from the IRP, and therefore where different interventions may be required if we are not going to get the rail investment that we thought was coming. So that assessment is one thing. There is also work going on, and you will have seen in the statutory advice and in the advice that we gave to the board that the board has mandated TFN to look at options for local funding contributions, and that's a tricky and challenging area. But there are precedents both internationally and indeed in parts of England where that has been achieved. It's not necessarily where we might have chosen to go, but it may be a route through which we can get more of the NPR network and certainly more of the preferred options back on the table. And so there is work underway now at pace to understand the options and to look at the opportunities for doing that. I think the third thing I wanted to just point to is the Transport Select Committee has announced an inquiry into the Integrated Rail Plan. The Chief Executive has been invited to appear alongside both, as I understand, the interim chair and the next permanent chair of TFN. That inquiry will happen over the next couple of months. We are working towards a submission, an evidence-based submission that will be working and putting through the board at the end of January. We weren't in a position to sort of share with the papers that went out for this meeting just because of timing. It'd be really helpful to sort of get any members' thoughts today on key issues for that submission. But equally, we will share the draft submission a little later in the month to give you time to have a look as well. Chair, I said I wasn't going to talk for too long. I've probably already talked for longer than intended. I'll leave it there and pick up any questions in the discussion. Chair, I think you might be on mute.
Thank you, Tim. If I could ask for Dave, I'm not sure if it's David or one of his team that, or David Hogarth or David Worsley, that's now going to talk about rail reform and the whole industry strategic plan and how that fits in with the IRP.
Yes, it's me, David Worsley, who's going to deal with this one.
Thank you.
So really, this next paper combines two issues, which is the ongoing response to the original William Shapps plan, which, as you remember, probably remember, was published last May, and we've discussed it several times at Scrutiny, I think, already in various guises. But there have been some new developments on that and the transition to Great British Railways. But also, in particular, there's been a call for evidence from the Great British Railways transition team for their whole industry strategic plan, which we've got to respond to by the 4th of February. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So in terms of the response to the original William Shapps plan, we've taken this idea of there being 4 pillars to TFN's future role in the railway industry through the main board, and the 4 pillars were based around our assessment of our own capabilities. So that was that we were uniquely placed to be a strategic partner for GBR in decision making in the future. We're the only people who are able to pull together a prioritised multimodal programme of investment across the north, leading into some sort of pipeline of investment. We've got great capabilities in terms of gathering evidence and data through what the TAME team does, and norms and NELAM and all these models we've developed. And also we're sort of politically the only people in a position to speak as a united voice for the north through our links with local transport authorities and mayoral combined authorities and the business community as well through local enterprise partnerships. So those were our assessment of our capabilities and why we think we've got a big role in the transport system in the future. But we've moved more on now to the actual activities that we're going to be doing in the short and medium term. So there's the ambition to have a joint strategic transport plan, effectively by the rail element of Transport for the North strategic plan being very closely aligned to, ideally interchangeable effectively with Great British Railways whole industry strategic plan and whatever they plan in the North for that. So that's the first thing we've started working towards with liaison with Network Rail and GBR staff. Another thing is to try to emphasise what we might call an outcomes-focused railway. So try to make sure that all our partners and GBR look not just at the outputs from the railway, but what we actually want to achieve with that. So, the outputs might be 4 trains per hour between 2 cities, but the outcome is an agglomerated labour market and boosting economic growth. So that's the second sort of practical area we're looking at. Moving towards a prioritised pipeline of investment, which ties in very closely with our ability to be the only people who can do a multimodal investment pipeline. The idea of double devolution, that devolution within the railway industry to the regions of Network Rail and GBR in future will be matched by devolution of powers within the local government structure. And a fifth concept we're working on is the idea of a profit and loss account for transport in the North, where we can look at what we wanted, what we actually got, how much it cost us, and sort of having a running account of how we feel that we're doing and have interventions been effective and efficient, and so on. So that's the overall wider issue of how we fit into the industry. But in the very immediate term, we've got this call for evidence for GBR's whole industry strategic plan. They've said they've got 5 objectives, which do closely align with the objectives that we've got in the strategic transport plan and the long-term rail strategy, but not in a one-for-one sort of way. In fact, for those of you who are into this, I'd say it's many-to-many mapping. So bits of their 5 objectives tie in with different bits of our objectives, and answering the question of what evidence we've got which supports them is going to be a bit complicated. But there are 19 questions they've asked, and I've matched these questions up to different work streams that Transport for the North are currently or have worked on in the past, and I think we can get all the evidence we need by using our existing work streams, and I've explained that in the document. So in terms of an overall flavour of what the most important parts of the response are, what I'd say is, yes, the idea of having an aligned strategic transport plan. Our STP refresh will be a 30-year look ahead. GBR's whole industry strategic plan will be a 30-year look ahead. So I think we can get those two pretty closely aligned. So that'll be the format of what we're doing. And in terms of the actual content, I think we can emphasise the fact that in a way all our goals are linked. So we often talk about making the railways better value for money, quicker, cheaper, safer, more environmentally friendly. All these things can be used to encourage a modal shift to rail from road, and by doing that, then we get the agglomeration benefits and the economic growth and levelling up and the sort of more wider socio-economic goals from these plans. So they are very much all aligned, and that's what we want to emphasise in our response.
Thank you, David. If I can now move on to, I think it'll be Chris Mason producing a rail investment update, but it's part one of David's team, I believe, anyway.
Yeah, it's actually me, David Hogarth. I'm going to present this. Chris is at another meeting, so I'm the sponsor of this report anyway. So I'll just talk you through it briefly, if I may. Essentially, on this wider rail investment planning report, we're highlighting 2 issues. One is about the East Coast Mainline investment and the links to the IRP, so it links into the report that Tim presented earlier on. And the second is around the overall investment pipeline and what's called the RNEP, which is the Rail Network Enhancements Pipeline that is owned by the Department for Transport. So in the report, we highlight that our own investment programme absolutely comes from the Strategic Transport Plan and the Long-Term Rail Strategy, as David Worsley highlighted, two key documents taking a 30-year look ahead, and that's how we develop our priorities from there, and we make statutory advice to the Department for Transport on what those priorities are. What this report is really highlighting is the IRP has an impact on some of that in terms of the choices of network, because the IRP is at the heart of, so the NPR network is at the heart of our long-term rail strategy, and also the comprehensive spending review, where the government sets out its plans for investment over the next 3 years in the rail network, also has an impact and bearing on this. The first thing we highlight particularly is the East Coast Mainline north of York, so a core part of the NPR network. And with all the issues and challenges that Tim Foster highlighted on the IRP, I think there is some good news in the IRP for that section, because it does actually provide a commitment to the investment that we've been seeking for some time north of York in the East Coast Mainline, and that is set out in the report in terms of what the IRP says, specifically on the East Coast Mainline north of York. That's in section 3.13. So what are we doing to progress that investment that is needed not only for the existing network but for future NPR services? First thing is we're working with the North East authorities on a piece of work on the strategic outline business case for making the case for that investment. So that is work that's ongoing at the moment, and we're able to support that with funding through TFN. The second thing is working with the industry now on the commitments that are in the IRP, which Network Rail is taking forward. Hopefully those two things will align. Our work on the SOBC will help support the case for that investment, which still has to be made. And the final thing is really the heart of the report here is Rail North Committee have really set down a call for a blueprint for the East Coast Mainline, particularly north of York. This is because the timetable, as you will know, is likely to have to be compromised in the short term, because there are not enough paths to provide for all the services that are needed. The Rail North Committee and TFN has been very, very exercised, because the east-west connections were the ones to propose to lose out in the original plans that the industry put forward. We put in a very strong evidence response to that. It looks like the industry are reconsidering that, which is good. But until we get the investment needed, any timetable is still going to have to carry an element of compromise. So the idea of the blueprint is to set out the infrastructure improvements that are now committed in the IRP and other improvements that are needed alongside timetable changes, so you can actually see each set of infrastructure improvements, what they deliver in terms of improved timetable, and the blueprint should show a direction of travel towards the end game, where we have both the east-west connectivity and the north-south connectivity that is needed as part of the overall long-term strategy. This is a mechanism that we've used successfully in the Manchester area. So in effect, the Rail North Committee is recommending that is now applied to the East Coast Mainline as well. And that's what we're suggesting in the report for your comment, and we'll be taking that through to the board at the end of this month. The final point in the report is an update on the rail network enhancements pipeline. In fact, there's not much to say on that because DfT haven't issued the update yet. We're expecting that to follow the IRP publication and the comprehensive spending review. It's still pending. I don't have a date from DfT. We've asked them about it and it is imminent, but there isn't a date for it. So we will be looking at that very closely when it is produced to see how that aligns with our own investment pipeline stemming from the Strategic Transport Plan. And we've actually included a high-level version of our investment pipeline in Appendix A, so you can get a good flavour of the breadth of potential investments and schemes that we're covering, and we'll be working hard to evidence support local authorities in some cases where they are local authority schemes, and make the case through business cases for those ultimately being included in DfT's investment plan for the whole of the north of England. So I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I'd now like to open this up to questions from the committee, and I would like to thank all the presenters for a very comprehensive set of papers there. And also, one of the reasons for asking for all three to be covered is I get a bit concerned about silos, and you know, sort of that different sets of questions are asked to different people. And I think it's important that we see all the answers and make sure that all the answers are aligned and coherent. So I believe that Sean Chater was my first questioner. Sean, please.
Chair, it's a question, but it's also a comment.
Okay, please.
After the last knockback that we had, which basically took all the work that everybody's been doing for many years and told us we weren't worth a light, why are we wasting our time doing this? Because it's quite apparent that government have made the decision that rail connectivity is going to be something for the south of England. And we can go whistle. We had sensible proposals that officers had got that were going to work very well, such as the fact that we had very simple connectivity to do between electrifying the docks and the main network from Hull. That's knocked back. Part of the other proposals that were being put forward was consideration of connectivity from the docks in Hull via the Beverley to York line to put connections in for freight and for passengers north of York. That's not going to happen now. So are we just moving our jaws to try and keep government happy? Or is there something actually tangible going to come out of this? Because I've got this horrible feeling we're moving our jaws and getting nothing. We expected some support from government, we didn't get it. It's transport for the south and transport for the Midlands, but nothing for us. No wonder some of the authorities in the North Links area are seeing their linkages being to the Midlands, not to us. Because that's what some of their leadership is saying. And we have got absolutely nowhere. We have basically flogged our guts out and done a lot of work and got absolutely nothing. So why are we bothering?
I think I can note, I think we will certainly note your anger and disappointment, but I do think you make a salient point that opportunities have been missed. So I'm not sure whether any of our presenters want to make either have an answer or make a comment on Sean's question stroke comment at all.
I guess I would just comment by saying, you know, that was absolutely the unanimous. Sorry, there were certainly comments made by board members at the November board to that effect. I'm trying to find a way of diplomatically saying yes. I think there is a big thing. One of the things that we are trying to unpack a little bit, and we need to understand, and we just do not know the answer to, is why has MPR being allowed to be developed jointly with the department on the basis of we need a transformational programme on an assessment process that has a very wide range of set of criteria. Aligned with the new Green Book that the Treasury adopted last year, and yet we have an integrated rail plan that appears to be making decisions on the basis of affordability and back to benefit cost ratios, and we don't have an answer from the department or government on those issues yet.
Thank you, Tim. If I can go to Matthew Salter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I echo, I suppose, the comments that we've already heard from Councillor Chater. I suspect that we will all be weighing in to some extent with the level of our disappointment at the integrated rail plan. I was also pleased with the sort of quick response of the board letter that Louise Gittins put in, and echo that. I was wondering if there's been a response to that from government, and if so, could we have that and see that? And I also just wanted to quickly ask officers just for a bit more information on sort of how they feel the integrated rail plan is impacting the Transpennine route upgrade plans. I mean, I have very significant concerns, but I'm just interested in what officers have to say.
Officers, if you could perhaps come back to that, please.
Yes, just on the a response was received from the Secretary of State, so statutory advice. It was sent to the interim chair just before Christmas. Our chief executive's on the call. Martin, I don't know whether you want to sort of pick up the response to the Secretary of State.
Thanks, Tim. Chair, we can certainly share the response because it's a public document. I know we've shared it with the Transport for the North Board, so we can by all means share it with members of Audit and Governance Committee. I think the high-level message is it was a restatement primarily of the government's position. I think there was a touch of disappointment from the board members that maybe the key point that they were wanting to get across to the Secretary of State, that there is a commitment and a desire on the part of the TFN board to work and explore with the government whether there are opportunities to secure local contributions that would enable the full ambition, if you like, that underpins the coordinated and programmed approach for Northern Powerhouse Rail that the board had agreed. I think that might have not necessarily been addressed quite as much as we hoped it would be picked up, but notwithstanding that, I think there is a hook within the response for us to continue that conversation with the government. If I might just respond, Chair, just while I've got the floor, just to the previous point about why is it important to continue to make the case. I'm really clear that what our strength as TFN coming together as that voice is that we base our advice in terms of ambition, yes, but it is based on evidence as well. So it's not about some vision which is not grounded in meeting outcomes for the North that we're all collectively seeking to achieve. I think it's therefore really important for us as TFN to continue to make the case for the kind of step-changing connectivity that the board's agreed and approved proposals for Northern Powerhouse Rail actually deliver, because it is about uniting the North. It is about addressing in connectivity north, south, east, west across the North in its entirety. And I don't think we should give up on that ambition, and I'm very clear that the board is clear we should not give up on that ambition. So I think we need to think of this as a starting point for a conversation we need to continue, and that's why it's really important that you as a committee, and indeed the board moving forward, continue to focus on making that case and using the evidence to make that argument as robust as possible. The appearance before the Transport Select Committee will undoubtedly be an opportunity for us to make some of those points more publicly before the committee, and I hope that they take that on board in terms of their considerations.
Thank you,
Would you like me to comment on the Transpennine route upgrade question that was asked?
Please.
I think the honest answer is we don't yet know how it's going to impact on that scheme in totality. Again, it's one of the things we're waiting for in terms of clarification from the IRP, what the intended outputs now are from the Transpennine route upgrade. But there is a core scheme that is still progressing, that we've supported over the years, and work is still happening on that. There's been recent works around Leeds, for example, completed over the Christmas period. So to some extent, work is still carrying on, which is good to see. We also know that, again, points we've been arguing for over many years and using our evidence base to argue for the fully gauge cleared route and full electrification are now baked into the IRP proposals. So I think, again, in our response to the IRP and the concerns that we obviously have overall, there is still a core TransPennine scheme over the next decade or so that will deliver many of the benefits we've been pressing for at that point, albeit not a replacement for NPR in total.
Thank you very much, David. I now have Stephen Fenton, if you would like to ask your question or questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up the response to the IRP, I think the TFN is in a somewhat invidious position in that whilst the IRP is not one that we would have wanted, we have to try and make the best of a bad situation and work with government. Just on the point that was raised in the in the response to the IRP around the absence of any supporting technical information around environmental, economic and other impacts, I just wondered whether, from discussions officers have had with officials at DFT, whether they have a sense that those documents simply don't exist, or they do exist, but they no longer fitted the narrative around what the IRP now is. I just wondered if you'd sort of had a sense from discussions that you've had whether it was one or the other, and just to thank David for the update on plans to take forward the proposals for the line north of York. It seems a sensible approach, and it was helpful to see a commitment in the paper for it to be driven on the basis of measurable outputs and hopefully outcomes as well, in terms of what that work is aims to achieve, not just in terms of protecting protecting current service frequencies, but hopefully creating the capacity for additional frequency, particularly east-west. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm not sure there was a question there, so I'm going to move on to the next question, if I may, which is...
Chair, if I might just indulge, I think there was a question about whether we knew about the evidence and the supporting evidence. And just to respond to Councillor Fenton in that respect, my understanding is that the department do intend to release some background information. It is something that we, and I know others, have been asking as to when that information will be made available. I've not had a date from the department. I've not had any indication that they have released any background information. I'm also unclear, Councillor Fenton, as to what the nature of the information might be. I get a sense it might not be at the sort of level of detail that we saw when the National Infrastructure Commission, for example, published their rail assessment, rail needs assessment, but that's my speculation. So I think the answer is we've not seen anything. We keep asking the question. We understand that there will be something released by way of supporting evidence, but I'm not sure as to when that will be.
Thank you very much, Martin. Steve Parish, please.
Morning, folks. Warrington is, of course, in two minds about being one end of a truncated MPR to Marsden with capacity problems beyond each end into Liverpool and Leeds. I'm going to do my usual parochial thing, though. You know what Warrington thinks about the cuts in services because of the Manchester Rail Recovery proposals. We've discussed that, but it has wider application for the Rail Investment Planning update. 320 in the report talks about new stations and line reopenings. But of course, we've got a new £20 million new station at Warrington West, funded not by the railway industry, but by third-party funding, nearly all public money. And that was on a business case of 2 trains an hour to Manchester. Northern Rail promised 3 trains an hour in their franchise, but the Manchester proposals mean there will now be 1 train an hour off-peak, and shortest journey times taking 45% longer. So for new lines and new stations, let's just say it would be nice to know that trains will actually stop there.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm not sure whether the officers have any answers for that particular notion at this point of stopping at Warrington, and I'm sure there is a reason to stop at Warrington.
it was a caution for everywhere else that wants a new line. First, make sure you're actually going to have some trains calling there.
Okay, well, noted. Your comments are noted. Councillor Rod Fletcher, please.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I too, like I think the rest of us, are very, very disappointed with the amount of funding that's been made available. £96 billion. Now, trying to work out where the £96 billion is going to be spent, from the figures I can work out, 54 billion is going to be spent on HS2, including 2B. So that's 54 billion. There's then going to be some money spent on HS2, the eastern leg as far as East Midlands Parkway. There's also going to be the continuation of Liverpool to Manchester Piccadilly, and also more recently, it's been pointed out that the Midland Line's electrification from Kettering to Market Harborough, that's also going to be included in the £96 billion. And I don't think the Midland Line electrification is going to finish at Market Harborough. I would expect it to go further north. So is that going to be coming out of the £96 billion as well? So the question really I want to ask is, how much of that £96 billion is actually going to be spent on Northern Rail, especially between Manchester, Leeds, York, Hull, etc.? It talks in the document that there's going to be the line's going to be increased from 3, possibly 4 between Manchester and Huddersfield, but no increase between Huddersfield and Leeds. Yet it talks about an increase in passenger services between Manchester and Leeds. Now, where is the capacity? If you need to increase the line from 3 to 4 between Manchester and Huddersfield, how come there's capacities on the 2 remaining tracks between Huddersfield and Leeds? It doesn't make sense. With regard to gauging for freights, it talks about gauging. Well, which lines are they going to gauge? They're certainly not going to. Well, they could, but I doubt if they're going to gauge Liverpool to Manchester Piccadilly, because I can't envisage Freightliners running around in Manchester Piccadilly. I know they did years ago, but even then they were limited to 33 standard length units when they did that, so that's not long enough for modern Freightliners. And at the end of the day, where is the capacity? Because about a year or so ago, well, about 2 years ago now, when I attended a meeting in Leeds, when I got back from the meeting at Leeds, the line was blocked between Huddersfield and Marsden. The services were in absolute chaos. Eventually, I got a service home. They found a driver that knew the route via the Calder Valley, and we then went Calder Valley, Hebden Bridge line. But the Hebden Bridge line has all the local services on, and we were stopping and starting following the local service until we managed to get past it at Rochdale. But basically, we don't have the capacity. If we're going to electrify and gauge clearance, there's going to be years and years of delay for the few trains that can actually run on these lines. This is an absolute disaster. But basically, the bottom line question is, how much of the £96 billion is going to be available for Northern Rail? Sorry if I've gone on a bit, but I'm really, really upset. Your
passion is noted, and your level of detail is also appreciated. So thank you very much. Back to you, officers. Maybe you can help answer the question: how much of the 96 billion is coming north, really?
Chair, I'll do my best. I'm hoping you can see me all right. I think
you've gone in the dark.
Am I? I may take my camera off just for a sec to help with connectivity while I answer the question. I think the immediate answer is we don't have precision and certainty. I think for all the points that have been made, we do not have the clarity about what will be delivered and when. But I think in the assessment that we were able to do, I think we concluded that once of the 96, once HS2 to Manchester and the phases of the eastern leg from Birmingham to at least to the East Midlands are accounted for, there's a funding envelope of around 23 billion, nearly 23 billion, for Northern Powerhouse Rail, but that includes now Transpennine route upgrade. So actually the net figure left for Northern Powerhouse Rail is around 17 billion, which is, as the committee will know, is some way short of at the full cost of the MPR network that has been discussed previously. There are one or two other sort of smaller budgets in the IRP, we understand, for doing smaller schemes and some of the upgrades and electrification that's discussed in the IRP, but we don't have certainty on the detail. And again, I think this sort of takes back to the point that's been made of whilst the TFN version of MPR was designed as a very integrated network in a coherent way, we now have a set of effectively funding proposals for different elements without that full picture about how everything fits together. So, and I think particularly in terms of electrification, in terms of freight, we're still a very long way from understanding what's going to be delivered.
Thank you very much, Tim. Rod, did you want to come back, or is that what we might term a legacy hand?
Sorry, that's a legacy hand. Sorry.
That's okay. Then Lindsay Amelia, please, your contribution. Lindsay, I think you're muted, sadly.
Sorry, I pressed it off on the thing and it didn't work. Just on the whole industry strategic plan on the call for evidence. On question 2 for accessibility, because we also feed in evidence on level board and how this can be achieved. The Department for Transport released Inclusive Mobility, a guide to best practice on access to pedestrian and transport infrastructure in December, which worryingly claims that level boarding isn't possible due to the standard 950mm height of rail platforms. This is incorrect. The campaign for level boarding aims for a rolling programme of improvements to bring all platforms up to the UK standard, which is 950mm in height with a 730mm offset. Level boarding can be achieved with low floor trains with retractable steps to meet the platform height. We've shown that this can be achieved on the Merseyrail network, and it could be used as a case study example. Level boarding benefits everybody. It benefits wheelchair users because they can use the train like everyone else, and it benefits older people, people with reduced mobility, passengers with luggage, bikes and pushchairs, and improves safety on the railway.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Your question is slightly off pitch. However, I'm happy to allow it, and we'll just ask the officers if they could give a brief answer to. I think we have an equality statement and within our transport integration and access for disabled, but perhaps the officers could just give clarity on that and hopefully some comfort to Lindsay that this is going to be addressed within the scheme of things.
Yes, lots of the issues she's mentioned are going to be addressed through the station strategy, which we're working on at the moment. We're just getting the results of that coming back from our consultants that have been working on it, and we think there's going to be a fairly good case for a programme of investment across the north in stations to bring them all up to a common standard. And we certainly look at the example of Merseyrail and what they've done as an inspiration there. So some of the material from the station strategy will feed into our response to the whole industry strategic plan, but also we'll be coming with that to you separately with the results of the station strategy and addressing some of those issues.
David, that's excellent. That's the best thing I've heard so far in this particular item. So well done on brightening the mood slightly. Just before I go to you, Matthew, I'd like to ask a couple of questions, if that's okay. I picked up a couple of things from the conversation, and that I would like the officers to perhaps answer. The first one is on local funding contributions. In the last year, the North Yorkshire LEP contributed £10 million to a line upgrade or a signalling upgrade just outside York, so that we could have 2 trains an hour between Harrogate and York, as opposed to the 1 train an hour that we currently have. My question is would LEPS be a source of funding? And the second question I have here, which will be for a different officer, which is to do with, we were talking about being outcomes focused, which I'm delighted about, and then we started to mention KPIs and perhaps a P&L account. But and my question there is, in the P&L account, would we have some measures that were around social impact, which I think is key to what we're trying to achieve here as well? So those are my 2 questions. Thank you, officers.
I'll pick up the local contribution question, Chair. Yes, potentially. I think it's a qualified yes, because it's a yes in the sense that we're already talking to our LEP board members, and some of the LEPs will be heavily involved in the work to look at options for local contributions. TfN did quite a bit of work on all of this in developing the strategic transport plan, and one of the principles that we have been working to in terms of looking at opportunities for local contributions is actually not displacing other investment that is required. So we know that connectivity is a really important part of what's required to improve productivity and outcomes for people, but it's not the only thing, and therefore we wouldn't necessarily be looking for local contributions to connectivity if that meant that was displacing other opportunities to improve outcomes elsewhere. There is, I think, also a realistic question about scale. Given the shortfall in funding that we're talking about, it doesn't feel as though it would be appropriate to use either public money or which is meant for local outcomes, or indeed necessary that it would be feasible to plug the gap between what appears to be an offer in the integrated rail plan and the level of investment that would be required to create the kind of connectivity that's needed. So I think wherever we get to, it will be a combination of, as Martin said earlier, continuing to make the case for more centrally funded investment, but also looking at whether there are opportunities, whether that's through land value capture or other mechanisms to better reflect the wider economic social return from rail investment. So apologies, that was a bit of a half an answer, but I think, and I think it was David who talked about the profit and loss. But absolutely, where all our work is taking us now is there is there are outcomes in terms of economics and prosperity for communities. There are outcomes in terms of environmental benefits and particularly decarbonisation, and there are outcomes in terms of social benefits for different communities, and we're now getting to the point where we capture all of that in the work that we do, and that would firmly, I think, be a big part of that profit and loss account, trying to cast that in the widest possible basis.
I can add a little bit of comfort on the detail of that, which obviously comes from the work we've been doing with Network Rail and Great British Railways. I think the idea of that is twofold. I think it's quite an innovative approach, actually, which again, is something we can offer. We've already got some of the information for that through the Rail North Partnership. Twofold, really, because firstly, it would allow us to prioritise against a budget across investment, infrastructure and rail services for the first time. So that's very much in line with TfN's proposals in the Transport Charter, a budget for the North that we can prioritise against, which has often been the problem, including with NPR in the past, that we haven't been given a funding allocation to prioritise against. So we'd get that. But absolutely, to answer your question, Chair, directly, we would want to see the social and economic benefits reflected in that. So it's much broader than just your kind of financial profit and loss. And that would be a test as to whether the investment is actually delivering for the wider needs of the North rather than just the railway.
Thank you very much. Thank you for answering my questions. Councillor Amelia, I see your hand is still up. Is this a legacy question, or have you put up for a new question? And if you have, I'd like to go to Matthew first. Is it a new question? I'm assuming, well, I can't hear you, Lindsay, so I'm going to ask Matthew his question.
Well, thank you, Chairman. As it happens, my question is really a quick follow-up to Councillor Amelia's question on level boarding, which is clearly a very eminently sensible idea, and I was pleased with the response that that's been considered. One problem that I am aware of is that the HS2 trains can be at a different height. So when it comes to adapting stations so that we can have HS2 trains serving them as well, there's a concern with how do you make sure that you've got level boarding for HS2 trains and your other trains. And so it was just a quick question of whether consideration is being given to what can be done about that, so that we can move towards level boarding, which would be better from the qualities perspective, and I think better service for lots of rail users, but I'm just aware of that concern.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Can any of the officers add clarity to that at all? I think David Worsley, I think you talked about it before.
I think yes. I would just say that that's quite a technical issue about the types of trains which are used, because the trains which just run on high speed 2 lines will be different from the ones which have to come off and then operate on the existing network. And I think that's one of the reasons they're having to have 2 different types of trains, and it's they're having to design what we call the classic compatible ones from scratch, whereas I think the designs for the ones which are just going to run on a high speed network, they could just buy them off the shelf from other countries, because it'll be completely new infrastructure and trains. So it is I don't know how they're resolving that issue at the moment, but it is something I know, which is one of the problems high speed 2s have to deal with. Find out a bit more about it if you want.
I think clarity on that would be helpful. I think if they do the procurement and then find out that they've not procured, taking everything into account, it would seem remiss. So thank you very much, David. I now have Sean, if you would like to question or observation, please.
Yeah, just a quick one. You were talking about LEPs. Rumours are circulating that, well, there's 2 ways apparently this is going to go. Gove's telling one MP that he's going to do away with LEPs when they bring in more elected mayors, and they're using that as a pressure point to bring in elected mayors, saying you might get some more funding if you are willing to do this. And then you've got Shapps saying entirely the opposite, that all of it's set down for the rail plan. What concerns me greatly is that there's this mixed message going out about what's going to be happening with regard to funding for schemes. Let's be brutal. If it was 96 billion that was available for what's going on, about 96 quid is being spent on what they're going to do with the Transpennine. Because quite frankly, it's beyond a joke. The services are worse than they've been in years. We've got issues over COVID, which are meaning that services are adversely affected, which isn't something that can be planned for. But we're still in this classic situation where if we're trying to deal with the issues around the environment, and we're being told that we need to do modal shift in towns, well, we need to do modal shift with regard to what we're transporting of goods. Transporting it by road is dangerous in the fact it damages the environment. We've got the situation where the biggest port in England, which is the combined one on the Humber, will have no electrification. It just seems as though government are living in cloud cuckoo land, and I'm afraid that it seems to me like we all will be on that at this stage, because we're not getting anywhere. This is just basically, it is Joe. And I shall have to seriously consider whether I continue to be on this, because quite frankly, I don't want to waste my time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sean. I don't think there's a particular answer I can go for there, but I do appreciate the level of anger and passion that you have conveyed. So thank you.
Chair, it's not just me. It is common across large parts of the country. I'm hearing this from people in the northeast. I'm hearing it from people in the Midlands. I'm hearing it from people all over the areas that have been affected by government not putting the investment in that it indicated it was going to do. Now, if the government had put a fraction of that in and had actually looked at some of the options that really would work, that were affordable and were deliverable off the shelf within a very short period of time, then we would be in a situation where we might have some meaningful proposals. But as it stands at the moment, nothing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think you'll find that every single member of this committee shares your disappointment, but maybe not your eloquence. David Worsley, please come in.
Yes, I just wanted to make the point which hasn't been raised, but which is important for us, which is in regards to responding to the IRP. Yes, there's this big battle about the scale of investment, and the fact the scale of investment has not been what we were hoping for. But in terms of what we have to do, we also, because there's a lack of detail in lots of the things which are in the IRP, we also have to make sure that anything that is done doesn't make it more difficult in future to have a more ambitious plan of investment. So what we call making passive or active provision for the future. And so in terms of when we look at the IRP, we'll have to think about that, even if we don't get the scale of investment that we want.
Thank you very much. I think a coherent strategy is vital, particularly when you're talking about such huge sums of money that are required in these investments. So just before I sum up, I would just like to ask the officers involved if there was anything in the IRP that they welcomed. Was there anything, what elements of the IRP were helpful to us?
Well, there are lots of elements that are helpful, and certainly confirmation that HS2 will reach the northwest. That will reach Manchester, and that government still intends, in some form, although we don't know exactly how, to extend services to the northwest. Not least because just the connectivity between the Midlands and the northwest of England is important, but also because of that connectivity to North Wales, which is again a key part of the strategic transport plan. And again the element of new line between Marsden and close to Warrington that's committed to in the integrated rail plan is an integral part of whichever NPR network you are trying to develop. So from that point of view, we can point to a number of commitments that are genuinely new commitments, particularly in the context of Northern Power to Rail. But I'm afraid we're still left saying it's only parts of the jigsaw. And when you're looking at that, particularly the imbalance between the scale of commitments in some parts of the north and either uncertainty or the absence of investment, then I'm afraid I have to end by saying it's still a very limited and mixed picture that we're looking at.
Thank you very much. Do any of the other officers, or Martin yourself, if Martin's still on the call, wish to contribute before I sum up?
I'll just highlight, Chair, in Report 7, we've picked out that East Coast Mainline investment as something that we wanted to see. I think the issue there is, though, that investment without a clear blueprint for how services are going to be developed and the connectivity we want to see is not necessarily going to generate the return on the investment. So that's why we're emphasising the importance of the blueprint alongside it.
Okay, thank you very much. So with the indulgence of the committee, I'd like to just make some comments that I would feel that should be minuted, and I would like you to either object or support those particular comments. And I think we should be saying something along the lines of both anger and disappointment was expressed at the IPR that falls well short of expectations by this committee, and we support the main board in their rapid response to the government on this falling short.
Could I suggest put the word reasonable in, Chair, after expectation, or before expectations, reasonable expectations, because of what we'd been led to believe by government and what ministers had told MPs, we all thought it was a reasonable proposal that was being put forward, and what we've got instead is an unreasonable amount of funding.
Okay, thank you. The second point would be that we are disappointed in the lack of clarity, particularly or especially around the Transpennine route. Equally, we are disappointed that the evidence base around the economic impact has not been provided. There appears to be a lack of integration with the IRP, especially around electrification and at the largest port in the north of England.
Excellent.
Are there any other? And finally, we are also concerned about the environmental impact of this reduction in the rail network for the north. I've tried to pick up everybody's points.
Could I suggest if you add both for passengers and for freight?
Yes, thank you very much, Sean.
I think what you've said there is absolutely first rate, but I think if we add that in, it does make it firmer to government.
Yeah, it's quite clear. I'm just trying to make just checking the notes that I've made as I've gone through. I think that's about it. Does anybody want to add anything else to that, or are you happy that I asked for Gary to minute that as our collective response? I'm seeing nods, so I'm going to ask Gary to put that in the minutes, and of course we will see the minutes and we'll be able to approve the minutes next time. And maybe I will ask you after special interest in that particular item. Okay, well, thank you very much, committee. That was very worthwhile, and I would like to thank the officers for pulling all the things together and working as a team so that we were able to pull the information in together. So thank you very much. I'd now like to, I'm not sure if it's you, Tim, or whether Lucy is on the call, to ask if the strategic transport plan policy could be addressed. Item 8.
Lucy's going to lead this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you. Good afternoon now, everybody. I'll try and kind of briefly talk you through this. I won't labour over the paper. Hopefully people have had a chance to have a look at that. But essentially we wanted to come today to speak to Scrutiny to start to talk you through kind of, I guess, the next stage or the first phase of some of the STP kind of work streams that will be coming forward over the next kind of 18 months to feed into our revised STP. So as you know, in September, we took a paper through TfN board where we had agreed a programme for revising the STP. And in taking that programme approach, what we were focusing on is trying to take forward as much work as we can as it becomes available, so that all partners across TFN have plenty of opportunity to review the policies we'll be bringing forward, the evidence we'll be bringing forward, and we'll be using to kind of shape the revised STP. So essentially, the first phase or first wave of those policies are starting to come through, and our intention is, following feedback from Scrutiny and Exec Board, we'll revise those draft policies and look to kind of take them through full kind of governance and sign off at board sort of over the next kind of month or so. It's probably helpful for me to kind of set out the purpose of the policies themselves before we kind of go into the detail of the policies, but really keen to hear views from Scrutiny around the overall approach, around the specific policies themselves, or what else we ought to be considering. So, as many of you know, in the original STP, there was a section towards the end where we set out a series of policy positions. What we've been trying to do as part of thinking about the refresh for the STP and planning TFN's work streams appropriately is reviewing that to understand how much of that have we moved forward, and we can kind of demonstrate what we've been doing in that space, and how much of that do we need to kind of prioritise for either activities that we'll put forward for this financial year, or we'll do it at the start of next financial year. And throughout that process, we've worked really closely with our strategic oversight group, so SOG, who kind of day-to-day manage the programme with TFN officers. And there was a number of kind of policy areas that SOG and TFN had kind of agreed to prioritise for this financial year. So those were active travel, spatial planning, multimodal hubs, rural mobility, and another piece around international connectivity, which also includes aviation. So we've continued to progress those throughout the year, and we're now at the point of kind of starting to kind of finalise those draft positions in the hope to kind of seek sign off for those. So the paper aims to kind of set that out, set the process for that out. And as I say, in terms of intention of how we would use these, much like the decarbonisation strategy or the freight strategy we've developed will be fundamental to what we want to say in the new STP on those particular topics. The policy positions will be framed in a similar way. So in terms of, we'll be using them to kind of, once they've been agreed, shape what we want to say about those specific areas within the new STP. We'll also be using them to kind of influence government and providing our statutory function as and when we need to kind of issue advice and guidance on things. So it kind of preempts the view of the North that we'll kind of be able to use to provide that guidance. And similarly as well, what we're trying to do in these policy positions is not just set out the challenges, but also set out the opportunities and be quite specific around, you know, what actions TFN can take forward within the short to medium term, so the period of the next 2 to 5 years. So what actions will we be doing versus where will we be supporting partners and government in moving this agenda forward. So that's kind of the context to the policy positions and how we're proposing to use them. And as I say, the first wave of these have been worked up over the last kind of 6 months or so with partners, and we now feel in a position to share these a little bit more widely. So there's 3 kind of policy positions we're proposing to kind of take forward at this point in time: active travel, spatial planning, and multimodal hubs. I'd just like to kind of, I won't talk too much to the detail of exactly what the policy position says. Hopefully the board report that you've seen kind of covers a bit of that detail, but I did want to kind of draw out, I guess, what we think our roles are across those areas, and would really welcome views from Scrutiny around that. So on active travel, if we take that first, paragraph 3.4 in the report that was shared with you identifies that we see there's kind of 4 key roles for TFN to play here to proactively support this agenda. And those roles are promoting and supporting sustained investment in active travel at a local level to enable partners to plan and implement more ambitious and longer term schemes. So we know that that's a key issue. So I think trying to get more sustained investment in this topic is really important and a key role TFN can play. And then also making sure that our pan-northern schemes in our investment programme embed and prioritise active travel within the design and development process. So again, that's something we could we see a clear role for TfN in embedding, but also working with partners to think about how do we actually implement that in reality. The next kind of role we see for TfN, again, is around more generally supporting partners in promoting and raising the profile of active travel. So, you know, we know that modal shift is going to be really central to our decarbonisation agenda. And so how do we kind of work with partners across the north to really kind of raise the profile of that as kind of our first choice in terms of mode where possible. The next is around collation of best practice and innovation across the north from partners. So again, we recognise so many partners across the north are already doing some really fantastic and innovative things in active travel to promote it in their area. And again, a key role we see for TfN is about playing that connector role. So how do we share that across the north with other partners so that we can kind of learn valuable lessons and try and kind of improve the offer to kind of a more consistent way. And then the final one was around using our analytical framework to support partners with analysis of active travel and making those tools and data available where possible. So again, this will be locally specific evidence, highlighting potentials for increases in active travel in specific localities. And the idea is this might help partners with their own business cases. So they're kind of the broad kind of themes that we think and areas we think TfN can add some value. And then one of the key things we want to do in our next STP is turn our policies into action. So going back to the point I was making around translating the policies into what's deliverable within a short to medium term time for TfN to help deliver. So again, we've kind of tried to think that through quite carefully with partners. And one of the key things there is around building relationships with Active Travel England, which is a new body that's about to be set up, to make sure that they're fully considering the need to kind of have sustained funding for this. So going back to the point we made earlier, as well as so the longevity of funding, but also thinking about practice and scheme design. So again, one of the ambitions of Active Travel England is to kind of start to look at that in a more consistent way for the UK. So again, it's about trying to work with them and influence them as to what we think that ought to look like. The next kind of action, I guess, for TfN is about prioritising and embedding active travel in our pan-northern schemes. So how do we kind of implement that within the work TfN's doing? The next one is around applying those tools that TAME had developed to demonstrate the co-benefits of active travel, particularly in wider TfN work streams. And then also thinking about how we kind of distill that information and share that best practice across the north. It's about utilising kind of the existing groups that we've got in place, so our analytical advisory group, our Northern Evidence Hub, to kind of share what best practice looks like and innovative appraisal techniques that might be being applied, both by TfN and our partners, to try to make sure that we're fully kind of embedding and starting to deliver on some of those policies. I'm happy to kind of pause there if anyone wants to talk about active travel, or I'm happy to kind of work through the other kind of actions for the other policies and then kind of take questions at the end, whatever the chair thinks might be best.
Lucy, I'd like you to plough on through the paper if I may, if you may. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, so the next kind of policy position we're proposing to take forward is around spatial planning. And this is about developing a framework for TfN to work in. So as you know, our strategic transport plan is a statutory plan. So legally, it ought to be a requirement not just of government, but also of local partners. And so we're really keen to work with partners to support their economic planning, their transport planning, and think about how the work that they're doing within their own geography, what does that mean in terms of kind of the pan-northern picture? So thinking about how we work with those partners to kind of make sure that their plans are aligning to the TfN vision and what's the kind of cross-authority kind of connectivity that's required. So again, we've been doing quite a lot of work with TfN partners, but also with industry bodies in this space. So the Royal Town Planning Institute, Homes England, etc., to really think about what our role ought to be here. So I'd like to bring your attention to paragraph 4.4 in the report, which again draws out within this space, we think there's kind of 4 key roles for TFN. So those roles primarily are around early engagement with partners in developing their own spatial plans and working openly to support appropriate development of infrastructure options. So very much the space, for example, that Highways England play in terms of if specific plans are have a wider impact beyond that immediate, the transport of that immediate area. That's kind of the space we would anticipate TFN working in terms of providing some advice around how their local plans are impacting on the strategic picture. The other kind of key role I think partners see for TFN in this space, again, is around building that evidence base. And this is a key theme across all of our policy positions we're developing. So how do we utilise the evidence base and the analytical tools and data that we've developed through our models to support our partners? So things such as our transport decarbonisation trajectories, the Northern Evidence Hub, the future travel scenarios, all of those tools that sit within kind of TFN's evidence base, we believe would be really helpful for TFN partners. So again, it's about making sure that they're available for people to utilise. And then the other kind of key theme around this is around making sure our vision aligns to the proposed developments. So again, when we took the STP programme through board, some of the feedback from board was around making sure there is that alignment between local plans and strategies that are currently being revised or will be revised and the overall STP. So this is a mechanism to start to kind of join that up a little bit and make sure we understand what work's happening where, what changes are happening, and making sure we're reflecting that in our overall revised STP. And then the final thing is around thinking about how we collaboratively support partners in preparing strong policies and proposals that are sustainable, practical, well-designed, etc. So again, it's very much TFN playing a supporting role here, but we're trying to solidify what that actually means. And paragraph 4.5 again outlines the specific actions we think we can take in the next 2 to 5 years to help deliver this. So that is building those links with local partners, showcasing that evidence base, collating evidence around the current spatial planning, etc., so that there's kind of a central log of that. And I think that would help partners as well with their own duty to cooperate, so they have an understanding of what other authorities within their kind of wider geography have planned. So there's that kind of joined up approach. Similarly, again, we recognise there's varying requirements for government funding applications, and so potentially, there's an offer to support those applications to reflect place-based approaches. And again, there's some really interesting stuff that our team, our modelling team at TFN have been doing in this space to collate evidence to feed into our models. So they've been collating a development log and an investment log to kind of track either where developments are going to be placed across the north, but equally as well, where's that investment coming forward, so we can have an understanding of that and reflect that within our travel markets. So again, that's kind of a really helpful central log that we're keen to kind of update for our own models, but again could be really useful evidence for partners. And again, the final elements around this are around kind of engaging with wider stakeholders. So those bodies I mentioned before, the Royal Town Planning Institute, Homes England, etc., are all kind of key to kind of shaping this. So again, it's that TFN in a connecting role, playing that conduit between some of our partners and some of those wider organisations. So that's kind of spatial planning. And finally, I'll move on to multimodal hubs. So again, we've been trying to think about what our role is here. And again, with multimodal hubs, it goes across kind of everything TFN does. So we've been trying to think about that role, and paragraph 5.4 in the report outlines, again, 5 key roles we think we can play in this space. So part of that is around making the case for financial investment in multimodal hubs. Part of it's around supporting partners through access to expertise within TFN to help shape their own business plans and shape what what ought to be considered within a multimodal hub. There's also providing the evidence, as I've mentioned, so a key theme throughout the policies, showcasing best practice for partners. So again, it's about sharing those lessons learned across the North and TFN kind of collating that for the benefit of all partners. And then also potentially undertaking work to identify multimodal hub locations for partners. So thinking about locations that might, benefit from improved passenger information, marketing, what else could be added to, a train station site, etc., to, make it multimodal as best as possible. And again, as with the other positions, they're all structured in a very similar way. Paragraph 5.6 of the report outlines the actions that we propose we could take within the short to medium term in this space to really kind of drive this forward and support partners in this arena. So again, it's about working with partners and around your own development plans and thinking about how do we utilise our evidence to build that case for multimodal hubs, sharing what good looks like, sharing the tools in our analytical framework as best we can to kind of help partners when they're putting forward proposals, funding proposals for investment in multimodal hubs within their locality. And again, another key action around this, and I heard David Worsley mention it earlier, is the rail station study that Strategic Rail have been doing. Again, sharing the findings of that will be really critical to think about what a good multimodal hub looks like and what ought to be considered there. So I appreciate that's an awful lot of information. I'll pause there and I'd really happily welcome comments, thoughts, questions from Scrutiny.
So Lucy, you don't have to wait long. I have Sean Chater, who's your first questioner or observation. So Sean, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The point that we're talking about with the multimodal hubs is an absolutely brilliant point. The more we can use, just as an example, on the outskirts of Hull, there is a railway station in Heswall in the East Riding. Hardly anybody uses it because it is isolated and people don't feel safe on it. A few hundred yards away, we have a park and ride. Park and ride is well used, buses use it, people use it with their cars. People have suggested it would be a good idea to move that to being a multimodal hub where people can park, people can catch buses, people can walk to it, but also they can then catch rail services to take them out of the area. So if we're going to be looking at local transport plans, maybe these are the sorts of things that we need to start to talk about, how we're going to change things around areas. Making sure there's an encouragement for the modal shift to get people into public transport, having buses linking to them next and having existing rail networks connected to bus services. I know we talked about this with the tickets, but we do need to make sure that local plans are reflecting this. Some of the authorities are very progressive, some aren't, and we need to be encouraging the ones that aren't as progressive to become more progressive for the benefit of the entire community. The other thing that's been suggested, I mean, my darling wife is a town councillor, and she was saying about the equivalent of Boris bikes would be a good option to be put into some of these sorts of things like the modal shift, where we're talking in terms of multimodal facilities. Because if we're going to be able to encourage people to actually to come to visit a place and then to be able to hire a bicycle and go around the city centre, town centre, into the country and then come back, that's going to be a positive impact when it comes to dealing with how we go forward. I think what's been suggested here is excellent. I think the work needs to be carried forward. We're talking in terms also of where we need to be making it absolutely crystal clear, as I always keep making the point, about getting freight off the roads and getting freight onto rail. Because the other thing we keep forgetting is that there is connectivity with the ports for certain bulky items to be transported by water. And if we're talking in terms of multimodal, that might be another option. I do know that you've moved for people like Drax by water, and it may be that we need to start to talk about more of that again. But I do think what we've had today is very positive, and I'd like more of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sean. Lucy, I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but maybe the question is, on your multimodal HUD policy position, is there room for freight to be included in that?
And the bicycles.
Okay,
yeah.
and the bicycles.
Thank you. No, that is a valid point, and I think definitely one of the things that's quite tricky in developing the policy positions, and I think we appreciated it before, but it's kind of come to the fore in working these through a bit more, is clearly across all of these areas there's lots of interdependencies with other work streams in TFN. So, you know, as much as we're approaching one topic, it does cross a wide range of those. So I think particularly on multimodal hubs, you know, it does link into freight, it links into active travel, decarbonisation, etc. So the policy position itself does try to draw out a bit more. But of course, as part of continuing to take forward the actions, if the paper's adopted, I think absolutely we'll be working across TFN with officers to kind of make sure that it's like a holistic picture rather than individual policies themselves.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and that's especially why the other three items were combined, because we want an holistic view. But we would ask, and I will formally request it at the end, that freight and other active transfer is considered within a multimodal hub. And that might also be for the fact that so many people get stuff delivered to home. And I know in York, I think they have a very exciting pedal delivery service that they're trialling. So stuff gets delivered to that hub, and then somebody gets on a bike and delivers it to the appropriate location. Anyway, over to you, Rod.
Thank you. Yes, very pleased to see the emphasis that's now being put on warehousing being rail connected. I presume this is a fairly new report because, say within Cheshire East, there used to be Basford Hall sidings, which used to be some of the largest marshalling yards in the country. And large warehouses are being built on Basford Hall at this moment in time. But the emphasis has been on improving the roads between Basford Hall and the M6. And also these warehouses, they're built by developers. And according to developers, there's an extremely large demand for new warehousing. I won't say what's happened recently that's caused that, but an extremely large demand. And these developers, they're building warehouses and then trying to let them. Now, if we want them to be rail connected, and certainly if they are near a railway line, as Basford Hall is, we need more forward planning. We don't really want developers building large warehouses and then saying who wants it. We want them to be building large warehouses if they're near a railway and say, yes, we want them to be rail connected. That's one point. And the other point on active travel, which I'm a very strong supporter of, but in recent times, there's been some very bad active travel schemes put in my area, which are giving it a bad name. So again, with active travel, we need to have very good forward planning to make sure that what may be helping in one area is causing serious problems in another. And the final point I want to make is, in pre-app planning applications, when I've met with developers, I've asked for improvements to the plan that will make it easier for people to walk rather than using the car. For example, on new estates, try and ensure there's better safe walking areas to the nearest school. And in the pre-app consultations, the developers, oh yes, we can do that, we can do that. When the final detailed submissions are come in and are approved, these improved walkways, they've just vanished. And it's resulting in people having to get into the car to take their children to school, when if originally they'd put in the safe walkways on these new estates, they could have walked. So I'm sorry if I've gone on a bit, but I feel very strongly on these issues.
Okay, well, Rod, look, thank you very much. Just on the planning issue, only yesterday at the Executive of North Yorkshire, we actually passed an item that suggested that walking should be a critical. Walking in 20 mile an hour zones, etc., and active travel, which might be cycling, etc., should all be part of any new development. And I'm sure that that if I were to ask any of my Liverpool colleagues, they will be saying, "Why are you so far behind us?" However, we have got there eventually. So I take your point, Rod. Lucy, there's a couple of things there. I thought it was interesting. So building on the local delivery issue, but also warehousing, and maybe there's something. Maybe there's a multimodal hub part 2, which actually is actually deliveries and supply chain.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I think for the purpose of the original work, we kind of left freight primarily out of scope, but it's really good to kind of hear that feedback, and we can definitely go away and have a look at that and think about how we kind of embed that, or like you say, develop a phase 2 to the work, if you like.
Well, I'm not going to let Sean tell you how important freight is, because I can see it on his face.
No.
But
the point that was being made by Rod was absolutely spot on. There's a big development just happening outside of Hull in the East Riding, and it is very close to the existing rail line. And there's a massive development for Amazon going into it. Now, Amazon transporting goods to their warehouses by rail would be a really positive move rather than the amount of lorries on the road. And I just thought the point that Rod made needed to be emphasised, so that it's in the reports for a local authority near to me, so that they can consider it to minimise the route problems, because as was said by Rod, the amount that the pushing is onto the A63, which runs into the M62, rather than getting it on the trains. So I think it's a really good point that Rod made, and I'd just like to support what he was saying.
Absolutely, and I too support it. I think it's very important, and I want to remind Lucy, just in case she's not aware of this figure, that about 93% of all freight goes by road in the north of England, and we need to change this. So I do think that there ought to be something to do with freight within your policy developments. How that fits in, I'm not. A, I'm not your manager, and B, I'm sure you can find a route to this and recommend it. However, what I can say, as a committee, we are very concerned about the level of freight and its impact. So there are no more questions at the moment, but I have a couple of comments stroke questions. The first one is, I've looked at all your all these different policies, and it comes back to integration. And my big concern with other policies, and my big concern is that even if it's just a stain line that goes at the end of each policy, this is aligned to help help the government to achieve net zero by 2050, and is part of our coherent decarbonisation plan. This should do two things. One is it should remind people all the time, and two, it should give people access to funding and help them gain funding. I think it's really important. The other point that you made, and I do think this is quite helpful, and I don't know whether you is that I think, you know, you could almost serve a function here as a shared repository of ideas on best practice, because we've heard today from Amelia just about some of the ideas that are coming out of Liverpool, and I'm sure great ideas come out of other places. I mentioned Amazon deliveries getting cycled to people's homes in York, for example. So I do think there are lots of great ideas and best practice, and maybe there is room for some form of repository of best ideas to prevent people from reinventing the wheel, for want of a better phrase. The other thing is that I just wonder whether these policies should have something around social value included in them. So what's, you know, is one of the measures some sort of social value? However, I will leave it at that, and perhaps you can just comment on my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That really helpful thoughts. I think the point you make about kind of adding a line in to make it quite clear around the links to kind of the government agenda and also our own decarbonisation plan, absolutely we can action that. That's no problem. I think the suggestion you make around TFN being a depository for best practice, I think is innate within the policy positions, but we can make that more explicit. And I think that is the intention of these work streams, really. How can TFN kind of be that coordinating role, if you like, across these areas and share that across partners? So definitely we can make that more explicit. And then the point you make about social value, I think, is an interesting one, and I'll definitely go away and give it some further thought. It is also worth saying that within our kind of proposals for the business plan next year, obviously subject to funding, etc., our intention is, as part of the further policies that we're going to be bringing forward for development early next financial year, so from kind of April onwards, we are planning to bring forward a social inclusion kind of position statement. And that will very much be kind of pivoting off the really innovative research that we've done around transport-related social exclusion. So it's how we translate that research into policy. So we are planning to have a specific kind of position around that. But again, I will take forward and consider how we better kind of reflect it's a key consideration across all of them as well. So maybe I'll make that again a bit more explicit within the report. But thank you very much. That's all been really, really helpful feedback and definitely things we can action and kind of take forward before we move this forward.
Thank you very much, Lucy. If there are no more questions for Lucy, I'd just like Gary to note the following, that we are very welcoming and supportive of the policies that have been put forward. However, we would like some recognition given to freight, the perhaps local delivery and warehousing in conjunction with, let's call it public transport or active travel. Because and that the planning, the suitable planning is lined up, so we've got aligned thinking. So not only we got modal hubs for passenger transport, we've actually got modal hubs for the supply chain of freight, whether that's deliveries direct to people's homes, deliveries or deliveries to shops, if shops still exist in the next 50 years, which I'm sure they will, but not sure what small. Is that okay, committee? I'll ask Gary to put there. Thank you. So now we're on I guess it's the final item. So thank you very much. If I could hand over to Manjeet. It's my ambition to finish by 1 o'clock so that nobody passes out. So Manjeet, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm mindful of the time. I will be very brief. So this report before you is brought following the meeting of the Task and Finish group, which was held on the 22nd of November. So the report sets out areas discussed at the group meeting, and these covered scrutiny first, resources, agenda contents, future meetings, consultation calls, and any future Task and Finish groups should the committee wish to hold them. Members will recall that all of these areas have been previously discussed at previous committee meetings and consultation calls since the start of the scrutiny function review. So further details are all contained within the report, and today the committee is asked to consider these areas in detail if they can, and also to provide their views on the recommendations set out at paragraph 2 of the report. Thank you, Chair. Thank you,
Manjeet. So, committee, the way I'd like to operate this today, because I'd like to bring this review to a climax as such. We've got details in front of us today, but there's two things I'd like to do. One is I'd like to get our decisions recorded in the minutes, and then when we come back to our next meeting, we can review this particular minute. And if we agree the minute at that point, then that becomes a minute that will be submitted to the audit and governance group, who will then put this forward as how scrutiny should perform in future. So there are a number of different headings that I'd like to take and debate individually with the group so that we actually have clear decisions. I'm afraid it potentially is a little long-winded, but I think it will give us clarity as we have had much debate about this. So have I got your permission to pursue this in this way, committee? Yeah, thank you. So the first one is, does this committee believe that scrutiny first is actually the most appropriate method or the most successful method? What I can say to you is that the small task and finish group that met believes that is the case, but I would like to hear views on scrutiny first, please. Councillor Fenton, please.
Very briefly, yes, would concur with that. I think scrutiny should always have the ability to undertake a sort of a backward-looking piece of work if an issue arises that lends itself to that. But I think as the sort of default approach, this one I agree with.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or differing comments? Sean, please.
Just a quick one. With the time spans involved in most of the transport stuff, looking at it with hindsight, it takes us 20 years down the line. So forward-looking is always going to have to be the way forward. Whether it's delivered or not is up down to other people. But I do think we have to look to the future as to where it's going. Because as I say, if we look back, some of the schemes that were the finished Leeds station upgrade, and I think that was 7 years after it was originally mooted. So it'd be rather difficult to do these things with retrospect.
Okay, thank you very much. And Matthew Salter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just to put in a very quick comment. I think to a certain extent it's not so much that scrutiny first is something that I think we all love and think is brilliant, but that it's the best option that we have given how our committee works and how the board works, that it just gives us the most chance to influence what's happening. So I think we all know the pitfalls and problems with it, but I can't see any better alternative.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. One of the things that, just to be explicit, is one of the things that now happens going forward is that when we critique papers or we ask for additional information to be added to papers, that is now noted on the papers that go to the main board, that is our intervention. So I think that's important. And one of the things that we also ask for at the task and finish is that there might be a retrospective once a year on just to check that all the recommendations that we put through are being dealt with. So again, we do manage that. So
Chair, there is a little issue that arises from it, and it's about timing. Because this is one of the criticisms I get from councillors at my council on scrutiny function, is that sometimes decisions are being put in. It might seem in a timely manner, but you might, if you know there's any possibility that additional information might be required, you might need to bring it somewhat forward to enable that additional information to be ready so that we can give a full picture to Transport for the North Main Board rather than a partial one and say we want additional info. It's basically going back to Wednesday principles. If you know that you're going to need that additional information, you need to have it to enable you to make the proper decisions.
Your point is noted. Often we're on a bit of a lead time with the papers. The officers often do not have the papers much beyond. They're usually completed a couple of days before they actually come out to us. But your comments are noted. That and maybe we'll just have to turn around and say we need additional information before we can do any more on this, and that we suggest this doesn't go before the board at this point, and maybe we'll have to perhaps flex that particular muscle. But thank you, Sean.
Absolutely.
Are there any other comments on scrutiny first? Okay, well, look, thank you very much. The second issue is around resources that this committee has. We don't really have any, and we haven't really had any in all the time that I've been on this committee. But one of the suggestions is going forward is that, you know, sort of like any scrutiny committee, we should have the ability to run perhaps task and finish. So the options on the table are that there should be a small budget for us to be able to either A, call experts, which we did as an example recently on freight, or equally have some resource to help us do task and finish, which would obviously require officer time. And again, this also perhaps steps back into the previous comment that Sean made about if we need additional information, if that's not necessarily available from Transport for the North, can we actually bring it in from an external source? So I'd like to ask if there are any comments, additional ideas, thoughts on resource requirement for this committee. Okay, well, I'm going to take that as oh, sorry, Stephen. Apologies.
No worries. Yeah, just briefly, I think it would be helpful to have the ability to call on resource as and when needed in terms of supporting a discrete piece of work. We've managed thus far without having an identified scrutiny officer, but I think the ability to draw down resource when needed would be helpful to have.
Thank you. And Sean?
I entirely agree with what was just said by Stephen. I think we need to have the capacity to do things where it's appropriate. Because one of the big issues is always going to be when we think something needs to be done, and it might not yet be featuring in Transport for the North Main Board or whatever, but we've got something that we feel needs to be looked at that could become a relevant factor for them over the next however many years. If we haven't got the resources to be able to do some work ourselves, we're going to be rather stymied. And it's going to potentially make it a less effective way of supporting the main board.
Thank you very much. That's noted. So I believe that the requirement for resources is being supported by this group. So that will be minuted. Stephen, are you wanting to come back, or are you legacy handing me? I think he's gone, or he can't hear me. Okay. The third point is future committee meetings, and there's a couple of issues here. The first one is frequency of meeting. So on frequency of meeting, the main board have now opted to run only 4 meetings a year rather than 6. So the question for this committee is, do we wish to drop down to 4 meetings, or do we want to maintain 6? So that because our meetings are often long, and therefore we can get through more of the information, and equally going back to the previous comments about having resource to investigate things that maybe the board has not thought about. The task and finish group felt that we should have the 4 meetings that support and ensure that we are scrutinising what goes to the main board, but also that we should still maintain the other 2 meetings. However, I now open that up to questions here, and it looks like I've got you first, Sean.
I agree entirely with what was being suggested. We do need to mirror them, but we do need to have that additional capacity to pick up on the key issues and to work things through. It also gives us the opportunity where if we know something needs to be looked at in advance, we can ask for interim papers, and we can then be in a position where we can go forward with more detail, hopefully to be able to support them in what they're doing at the right time, because we'll have had the opportunity to get any interim additional information requested that can then be fitted into what we want to do. So I think that the suggestion from the panel is eminently sensible.
Thank you very much, Sean. Matthew?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I do agree with what's just been said. I think it would be, I mean, it's something that we could try doing for a year and see how it goes, and could obviously review at the appropriate point. But it would be interesting in giving us the opportunity to have 4 meetings, which are maybe our standard scrutiny first meetings, and 2 meetings where there's a bit more flexibility. As you've mentioned, it might dovetail with the idea of bringing in experts and exploring certain areas that we feel, might be our priorities that could be developed. So I think it would give us the possibility to add a bit more value as a scrutiny committee, perhaps, and it's certainly something that is worth trying.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments on frequency of meetings? I know we all have a lot of meetings, but we feel particularly passionate, at least the Task and Finish group felt that this was important, and Sean's obviously supported that. Okay, well, on meetings, the second issue on meetings is actually meeting locations and how we conduct meetings in future. So I need to give a little bit of background to this, because there's been a lot of what I would term challenges in the information available. So the first thing is that because the government have not changed any of the rules on council meetings where decision making can take place, and I have also got ratification that this particular committee is considered a decision-making committee, then in the face of normal situation, then these meetings should be face-to-face. So that's the first thing that I would say. This meeting today is being held under emergency powers, where the chief executive is delegated to carry out our wishes. Now, this is only when there are public health or some other issue. But at the moment, meetings first and foremost should be face-to-face. The second thing I need to add to this is we've talked about having hybrid meetings. Now, there's 2 issues with hybrid meetings. The first one is that I'll define what a hybrid meeting is. A hybrid meeting is where a number of us might be in a room and others, including officers, may be joining us via various screens. Because we, as a committee, are a bit nomadic in that we do not have, so we don't have a permanent location, acquiring the appropriate technology to run this from a continual moving base is not easy. However, it's not to say it's not achievable. However, there are 2 things that you do need to be aware of. If somebody joins a meeting, a hybrid meeting, the person is not counted as part of the quorum for the meeting. So our first concern is that we have to have enough people in that room such that the meeting is quorate. The second thing is that if somebody does join online, they do not, most things do not come to a vote, but should anything come to a vote, then they do not have a vote in that matter as well. So that's hopefully some clarification on the meetings situation. So what I'm asking today is what I'm suggesting today is that unless circumstances change, or depending on the circumstances of the public health issues, that meetings require to be face-to-face, and we would go back to having them when normality, or as close to normality, resumes, that they would alternate between Manchester and Leeds. So I open this up to questions. Sean.
Chair, I think that the officers at that level have been somewhat disingenuous, because at the end of the day, this is a meeting of councillors, not a meeting of a council. I'm the chairman of the Humber Bridge Board, and that's run under the auspices of the Humber Bridge, and we can have meetings remotely or whatever, because the 72 Local Government Act only applies to decision-making bodies. I'm afraid we are not a decision-making body under the terms of the Local Government Act 1972, in that we have no power to make any formal decision. We can merely recommend. We are a scrutiny body. That can be argued still that it is a part of local government function. On the venues and on when we resume having face-to-face meetings, eminently sensible. I do think that the two locations are the easiest to get to from the perspective of most people because of connectivity to the big cities using rail connections, which most people will be using. I acknowledge fully what was said with relation to the voting. We've had to have the same discussion just this morning at our council because we're in a situation where, because of COVID, we're having to be recommended to go to reduced numbers of people, and therefore it would only be those that can be in the room. Anybody else that joined would not be able to vote. They may be able to speak, but they wouldn't be allowed to vote. But I would strongly suggest that they look again, because this isn't run by a specific council. This is run by the civil service. This is not a local government function per se. We are local government councillors, and we have some officers from local government involved, but it is being run under the civil service, and their rules and regulations are somewhat different. They can apply flexibility. So I would ask that they review again and potentially get further legal opinion on this matter. I could recommend a few good barristers.
Thank you very much, Sean. I think, Manjit, you probably want to come in on this. Sorry, Matthew, just bear with us a second or two.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. I do want to come back on this. I think the discussion we had earlier at the pre-brief was in line with what the role of the committee is. As it's been previously set out in the committee reports that have been presented and in this report, it states clearly that the main function, the primary function of the committee is to review and scrutinise decisions which are to be taken to the board, and that is its primary functions. There may be instances where decisions will be made by the committee, and those most likely to be when an annual meeting is held and a chair is appointed, a vice chair is appointed, and maybe the work stream for the next year, following year, is agreed by members and voted on. So I just wanted to clarify that. I think the discussion that we had earlier was in relation to if the members wished for a face-to-face meeting to be held, that was entirely open to them, subject to health and safety, allowing for that to happen. But it wasn't for the purposes that it needed to be a face-to-face meeting in line with making any decisions. So it goes back to the recommendation which is set out in the report at 2.2, which states that the committee considers holding future meetings and consultation calls in line with the terms of reference of the committee, which are appended to the report, and state that the main function of the committee is to review and scrutinise decisions that are to be presented to the board for approval. I hope that clarifies, Chair.
I apologise, committee, if I have misled you there. However, I have read all these different things, and I am of the opinion that until the government changes the rules, at least some of our meetings must be face to face. However, we do have, as Sean quite rightly points out, we do have very long distances, and I think that in the end we should have a combination of some meetings, what I would call blended meetings. Some meetings are face to face and some meetings are online. However, I would value more comments. So Matthew, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I think that the advice that we've been given at different times hasn't always been especially clear, but I agree that in terms of the advice that we were given at the annual meeting, and the overall picture is that the official scrutiny meetings that we have are face-to-face. We can have a virtual option of having consultation calls as we have today, and that has value, but the ordinary meetings where we make decisions are supposed to be face-to-face as a legal matter. So, so I certainly my preference anyway would be that I think we should have our ordinary meetings face-to-face, but my understanding is actually we don't have much choice about it, and it should be face-to-face. What I would say is that given the discussion that we've been having about having 6 meetings, we could have our 4 meetings where we are performing our scrutiny first official function as face-to-face meetings, and it's in precisely those meetings where we would be probably making more substantive decisions and such forth. And if we're having 2 additional meetings where we might be calling experts, where we might be more having a sort of broader discussion on or a discussion on a particular issue of interest to us as councillors, it might be that on those 2 additional meetings, those could be done in a virtual format, and if we're not maybe making the sorts of formal decisions that we might be making normally, then it would make total sense to say, right, there are certain meetings that are happening face-to-face and certain meetings that are happening virtually, and it could be that we decide we have 4 meetings face-to-face as these performing our normal functions and 2 additional meetings. That's what I would suggest would work well, would fit with the advice that we've been given, and it might give us the benefits of being able to meet face-to-face at certain points and being able to sort of have those conversations between us at lunch, get to know other councillors and their perspectives better, but also have a little bit more flexibility that it's only 4 times a year that we're having to go to Manchester or Leeds rather than 6. Manchester and Leeds as venues, I would certainly be very happy with.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Steve Parish, please come in.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, it was a long time flicking over. Yeah, I'm actually on day 10 of a very mild dose of COVID and only just negative today, so I might not be able to attend a live meeting. I mean, our decisions, unless they are internal stuff like electing a chair or creating a subcommittee, they are purely recommendations to the board. And unless someone's actually going to take us to judicial review for an unlawful decision, does it matter? I mean, personal meetings are better, but it's not just being at meetings, it's travelling on public transport where people are not masked. So obviously we might hope that by the time the next meeting is due, this variant has actually got even better, and things are getting rather more back to normal. But I come back to that question: does it really matter if we meet remotely and take a decision? Who's going to challenge it?
Thank you very much, Steve. Unless there are any other questions, I'm going to put some options on the table and let's see where we go with this. So, in terms of the terms of reference, we have to have one meeting a year that is face-to-face minimum, and that's the annual meeting where things do get voted on, where we put who's the chair, etc., and perhaps a little bit of the forward programme, although that's never happened. The forward programme's never happened, I don't think, at an annual meeting. However, but certainly the appointment of a chair. So that's at one extreme. The other extreme is that all 6, but the other proposal is that the 4 meetings that support the main board would be face-to-face. But I am interested in what this committee feels, because I think it is important. We have we're over a long distance. We talk continuously about decarbonisation, and yet we will be travelling a long way. And the other thing is about, a lot of us are time precious, and it does take a long time. And it's important that we have experts from all over. So whether it's Rod or Amelia in Liverpool, or it's Sean over in sort of Hull, North Lincolnshire area, or whether it's Steve telling us that Warrington's been missed out again. We do have a lot of value in the membership, and so therefore it's important that this membership is able to be on these meetings. So I would be interested in the various views and options, and perhaps try and get a feel for what most people want. So Manisha, please.
Thank you, Chair. But as you've just mentioned, we definitely need the AGM face-to-face. But the other meetings, we do need to bear in mind the situation outside is, yes, we have to travel by public trains and things like that, where not everybody is looking for the safety and the health reasons. I think if the circumstances are not changed, we keep all our meetings via Teams and just keep one AGM face-to-face. If the circumstances or the situation is going to be better, then we can, by all means, have face-to-face meetings.
But having said that, Manisha, all meetings will be subject to public health considerations. So, that. But what I'm trying to get at is what we really want. If we didn't have COVID, where would we be? Where would you like to be in your instance then? If though you live in Leeds, so of course we're going to your home.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but if we haven't got COVID, everything is going to be normal. Yes, face-to-face meetings are more valuable. We have got more socializing. We can interact more. It's my only concern is if in this time of period, I would like only AGM on face-to-face. I don't know how the people are going to be managed. As yes, Leeds is the perfect place to join everyone. I think it's easy for you as well.
Yeah, it's an hour's journey down the road, so that's fine, just on the train. Let me bring in Sean.
Yeah, Chair, there's a couple of issues. Number one, the two venues are fine. The only thing I will say is that sometimes I had meetings this morning that I was able to do in Hull, where if the meeting had been in Leeds, I would not have been able to do them as well as doing the meeting in Leeds, because simply public transport would preclude it. So if we're able to take remote options, that's fine. I do think we need to challenge the issue about voting. There is an item that was on the BBC News yesterday or the day before. The leader of Rotherham Council has challenged the government about the health and safety issues over having large-scale meetings in buildings because of the issues to do with COVID. And I do think it's another issue that's got to be picked up on is the fact that people are travelling massive distances. And I do think that needs to be reflected. You look at some of the, the new North Yorkshire, when you start to talk in terms of people from Farley going all the way up to Northallerton and all the rest of it, there's going to have to be some thought given to how you do it, because the same would apply to Lincolnshire and large other areas. I do think there needs to be given some real serious thought given to it. I'm going to have to log out, Chairman, because my tablet is down to 2%. So I'll look forward to hearing what you all decide, but the best wishes for the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Matthew, you wanted to come back again?
Well, to be honest, Chairman, that's probably fine. I'll leave it for now.
Okay. Andrew Cooper, please.
Thanks. I'll keep it short. I work. I have very young children. The more we can do virtual, the better for me. Obviously, the AGM needs to be physical. I understand the point about the value of human contact. So 50-50 I'd settle for, but more virtual the better, so that I can do the other parts of my life as well, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments on this? James.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies again for arriving at the meeting late this morning. That was due to having a flood risk management meeting beforehand. And luckily, because we're online, both meetings, I was able to attend both. However, the flood risk management meeting didn't finish till 11 a.m. and there's absolutely no way I would have been able to get to Leeds or Manchester in time to join the meeting. So as far as I'm concerned, virtual meetings, certainly short term or the future, as it were. It's better for the environment. It's better physically from an health and safety point of view. Certainly with coronavirus still very much with us and very much amongst us. So from an health and safety point of view and from an environment issue point of view, and also again from time point of view, you know, travelling certainly from Blackburn to Leeds is not inconsiderate. So consequently, I'm a great believer, and certainly since COVID started, nearly 2 years ago now, I've become a bit of a fan, for want of a better phrase, in virtual meetings. They certainly work for me. And there's another security aspect here as well. We found, certainly in Blackburn with Darwin, that our lady councillors, our female councillors, certainly during the dark winter months, feel a lot more safe with online meetings than have to negotiate traffic or have to negotiate their way from the town hall back to their own transport. And so it works for me. I think physical meetings, if we leave it to the AGM or keep them to a minimum, certainly for the foreseeable future, that's the option I'd prefer. So thank you, Chair, for that.
Thank you very much, James. And now I think that Matthews wants to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I do just want to say a few things. I think for one thing, I do find it a little bit frustrating that we've sort of had to rehash this argument again and again and again. I think we've argued this out probably June, July, and the consultation call then. We've had this conversation in the annual meeting, and it's and so to a certain extent, you know, we can keep rehashing all of the arguments. I think there's a huge amount of value in being face to face, because I think that there are conversations that you have before the meeting, at the break at lunch, after the meeting, that are useful. There are conversations I've had with officers, there's conversations I've had with other councillors, which has sort of really helped me, and has been, I think, useful in improving the questions and the scrutiny that was taking place. I think that there's, for one thing, I hear the concerns about the time commitment and travelling, whatever, but equally, when we are here to talk about the transport plans for the North for the future, I feel that we really ought to have experience of the transport network and of the problems with the trains, and that actually also informs our conversations in a really valuable way. I mean, clearly, I think there's still a lot of concern about COVID, and as you've already said, really we're meant to be discussing what will happen after the situation has improved. And clearly, whilst there's government guidance saying that people should work from home, and there's that sort of guidance from Public Health England, I think we've probably all got to accept, however much I don't personally like it, we've got to accept that it is better to have, okay, as a temporary measure, these virtual meetings. But when the situation has improved, I really feel that the value of face-to-face meetings is really significant. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, when we become councillors, we are committing to give up, sacrifice time and make significant sacrifices in order to serve the people that we represent. And I think that having high quality face-to-face meetings 4 times a year would be delivering the best for the people of the North.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Are there any other comments at this point? Okay, look, James Leon, are you on the call still? James?
Sorry, Chair. Was that as in James on James Shorrock or?
No, James Leon.
Sorry, Chair.
I can't. He's muted or not. James Leon, are you here? Gary, is James still on the call? Can you nudge him?
I don't think he is, Chair. Sorry, apologies.
That's okay. So I'm going to ask you how your technical skills are. Can you run a poll on Teams, or is it down to James?
Ooh,
because the only way I can see this being resolved right now is that we run a poll, so that the voting is anonymous.
I wouldn't know how we do it on Teams. I mean, certainly if you wanted the anonymity side of things, the only way I would have been thinking was would be through the chat, but that won't give any anonymity.
Okay, so look, this is what I'm going to propose then. Thank you very much for that technical assistance, Gary. What I suggest is, and Gary will have to keep it anonymous, is that we ask that people email him with either 1 meeting a year face-to-face, 2 meetings a year face-to-face, or all 4 meetings face-to-face. I don't see a way around this because there's so many differing views on this. But the assumption is that when you're putting your answer down is that we are in normal times. So because at the moment, if there is a public health issue, then those issues will prevail. And if the requirement is to work from home, or the recommendation is to work from home, then those issues would prevail. So that's my sort of proposal. But I can see Councillor Jones has put his hand up. So perhaps you could help Councillor Jones.
Sure. No, I mean, I'm a face-to-face meeting person, so that's what I wanted to vote for. But I do accept there's lots of people who've spoken who want to see some online meetings. So could we not just agree that we have a 50-50 split between face-to-face and online, and we have to give the chair some discretion to advise us, in terms of the AGM and other things. I would hope we could resolve this now if we could agree something like that.
Okay, well, look, Councillor Jones put a proposal forward. Let me put it this way. Does anybody object to his proposal? Matthew?
Well, I wonder with the 50-50, does that mean 2 meetings or 3 meetings? Because we've said that we want to have 6 meetings a year.
Okay, Matthew, you're splitting hairs. I'm going to be talking 2 or 4. So, yeah, because the other 2 you've already conceded will be online, and I think that's a great, not just conceded, but you've actually said that would be get better value from it. So I agree with that. So we're talking, that's why I said 1, 2 or 4. But as I say, Councillor Jones has just put forward a proposal, and I just wondered how others felt about that, because I would like to see this reconciled before we leave today, if possible.
I thought we'd reconciled it at the annual meeting.
Clearly we haven't. Okay, Manisha, please.
Chair, I have to leave, so I'm just saying go for 50-50 if that makes happy to Matthew. But we have to be careful other people's circumstances as well. As Councillor Steve just said, he's coming just today. He just received negative, and it's not fair with everyone.
All right, thank you, Manisha. Okay, and Steve Parish, please.
Yeah, I mean, we are getting a bit confused because we're talking about, you're asking now about in normal times when there is no fear of travelling on trains or meeting together. And 50-50 sounds about right, but I mean, there's people left the meeting now and there's others who weren't here. So I'd go for just what you said previously, just officers circulate and get a view back. As long as the question they ask is clear as to which meetings we're talking about.
Okay. People are disappearing in front of me.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts, please? So Steve, you've talked. Manisha, do you want to come back, or or is that just a legacy hand? Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Just definitely AGM face to face, and then another meeting, and then just go online.
Okay. Thank you.
Chairman, I don't think we can finish it today because we've got people who we've lost from the call. Maybe the email option would work. Otherwise, saying that we'll decide this in our next meeting, perhaps as the first order of business, so everyone's aware ahead of time. That might work, but I doesn't feel that it would necessarily work to finish it all today.
Okay, look, thank you very much, Matthew. Then I will close the meeting with the fact that we will actually email, that Gary will email individuals with a very clear question.
Chair,
so thank you.
Chair, just to say that we can do we'll send out a doodle poll rather than doing it via email, so people can vote on that and sort of will then collect those results and get back to people as to what's been decided.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. So with that, I'm going to close today's meeting. I'd like to thank all the participants, the officers, and of course the committee who have provided some valuable insights, and hopefully we've made some helpful decisions today. So thank you very much, and